The wagon lurched to a stop, and 10-year-old Mara Ashwood's fragile world crumbled on a forgotten mountain trail in the Northern Territories. "Get out, girl," her uncle's voice cut through the autumn air like a blade, casting her into the merciless wilderness where wolves howled and winter waited. Alone, shaking, clutching nothing but a worn photograph and dying embers of hope, Mara faced a slow death in the cold, until a figure appeared through the pines, a powerful alpha who would defy centuries of tradition to claim her as his own. This is the story of the orphan child who survived the impossible and the wealthy alpha who discovered that saving her meant saving himself. Stay until the end to witness how love rewrote the laws of an empire. Hello, friend. Before we journey deeper into Mara's story, I invite you to subscribe and share in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence here matters. Now, let's continue. The late afternoon sun filtered through towering pines, casting fractured shadows across the Rocky Mountain Pass. The season was deep autumn in the year when old pack laws still ruled the Northern Territories with iron fists, and the wilderness stretched vast and unforgiving through lands where only the strong survived. A bitter wind carried the scent of coming snow and the sharp tang of spruce, while somewhere in the darkening forest, a wolf's lonely howl echoed against ancient stone. Inside the cramped supply wagon, 10-year-old Mara Ashwood pressed herself against the rough wooden slats, making herself as small as possible. Her dirt-stained fingers clutched a small cloth bundle containing a single faded photograph, the last precious remnant of her parents. In the image, her mother and father smiled, their arms wrapped around baby Mara, frozen in a moment before tragedy struck. The photograph's edges were worn soft from constant handling, the faces slightly blurred from tears and time, but Mara protected it like it contained her parents' very souls. "Quit your whimpering back there," Gareth Ashwood snarled from the driver's bench. The man who shared her father's blood but none of his kindness was all brutal angles and cold calculation. His weathered face, hardened by 40 years of pack politics, twisted with permanent disdain. "Should have left you with your parents' ashes 3 months back." Mara bit down on her lip until copper flooded her tongue. She'd learned through brutal lessons that speaking invited worse treatment. Her father, Liam Ashwood, had died defending their cabin during a territorial raid between rival alpha clans 3 months past. Her mother, Sarah, had survived only 2 agonizing days after, her wounds too severe even for pack healers. They'd burned the bodies according to Omega tradition, no graves, no markers, just smoke disappearing into an indifferent sky. 2 more casualties in endless pack wars that devoured the weak. After the burning, every heartbeat became survival. "You're worthless cargo now," Gareth had told her the night after the pyre's flames died. "Eating food meant for pack members, breathing air you haven't earned. Your Omega parents are gone, and you'll be just as useless." The pack caravan had separated from them 2 days ago. Gareth had claimed Mara showed signs of winter sickness, that they needed isolation. The pack's alpha, a grizzled warrior named Torhen Blackmore, had studied Mara with something like pity before nodding his permission. One family falling behind was regrettable but not unprecedented. Pack survival meant hard choices, and stragglers couldn't slow the group. But Mara carried no sickness beyond grief. Gareth had simply calculated that his obligation to his half-brother's orphan child had reached its profitable end. For 2 days, they traveled alone, Gareth driving the oxen with grim purpose, speaking only to curse or complain. Mara hadn't understood their destination until this morning when Gareth turned the wagon away from the main pack trail, steering toward nothing but wilderness and mountains that looked like wolves' teeth scraping heaven. "Where are we going?" Mara had finally whispered, her voice barely audible over creaking wheels. "You'll find out soon enough, Burden." Now, as the wagon shuddered to its final stop, Mara's heart slammed against her ribs like a caged animal sensing the trap's jaws closing. Through gaps in the canvas covering, she glimpsed their surroundings, absolute isolation. No other wagons, no pack settlement, no shelter of any kind. Just endless pine forest, rocky ground where nothing grew, and distant peaks crowned with early snow that promised brutal winter cold. Gareth climbed down from the driver's bench with heavy, deliberate movements. He was a big man, made bigger by his thick traveling coat and the barely contained violence that radiated from him like heat from banked coals. His beta designation meant he'd always served more powerful alphas, and that resentment had curdled into cruelty. "Out," Gareth commanded, ripping back the canvas cover with unnecessary force. Mara couldn't move. Terror had transformed her muscles into stone, her breath into shallow gasps. I set out. Gareth's meaty hand shot forward, grabbing Mara's thin arm hard enough to leave bruises, hauling her toward the wagon's rear. Her bare feet, her boots had worn through weeks ago, and Gareth had refused to waste coins on replacing them, scraped uselessly against rough boards, finding no purchase. Mara hit the frozen ground hard, the impact driving air from her lungs in a painful whoosh. She instinctively curled around her cloth bundle, protecting the photograph as her only thought. One parent's face in the image creased slightly from the impact, and grief stabbed through her chest more sharply than any physical pain. Gareth loomed over her, silhouetted against the lowering sun, looking like some avenging demon from the old territorial war stories. This is where your journey ends, girl. What? The word emerged as barely a breath. I don't. Uncle Gareth, I don't understand. Of course you don't. You're as stupid as your weakling father, may the oath forget his name. Gareth walked back to the wagon and grabbed a small bundle, Mara's only other dress, more whole than fabric, and a dented tin cup. He threw them carelessly onto the ground beside her. There. I'm being generous. That's more than Omega trash deserves. But you can't. Mara scrambled to her feet, her entire body shaking so violently her teeth chattered. You can't leave me here. There's nothing. No people, no pack, no. Exactly. Gareth climbed back onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins with practiced efficiency. You've been dead weight since your parents got themselves killed. Eating food meant for valuable pack members, taking up space I could use for trade goods. Well, I'm finished. You can find your own way now, or not. Makes no difference to me. Please. Mara lunged forward, reaching desperately for the wagon wheel. Please, Uncle Gareth, I'll be better. I'll work harder. I won't eat. I promise I won't make any trouble. Please don't leave me here alone. Gareth cracked his whip above the oxen's heads. The animals lurched forward, massive bodies building momentum, and the wooden wheel nearly crushed Mara's reaching fingers. She jerked backward, stumbling, falling again onto the frozen ground. Dawn broke with cruel indifference over the mountain pass, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and sickly orange. Mara's eyelids fluttered open, each movement requiring conscious effort as frost clung to her lashes like tiny crystalline tears. She'd survived the darkness, barely, but the achievement felt hollow when measured against the impossible task of surviving another day. Her entire body screamed protest as she tried to move. Every joint had locked rigid during the frigid hours, muscles seizing around bones that felt brittle as winter-dead branches. The rock overhang where she'd taken shelter provided minimal protection from the wind that had howled through the pass all night, carrying with it the promise of worse weather approaching from the northern peaks. The thin dress, her mother's once, now more patches than original fabric, had frozen stiff where her tears had dampened it. Mara's breath emerged in white clouds that dissipated quickly, stolen by the same merciless air that sought to steal her life. Her fingers, when she finally convinced them to release their death grip on the photograph pressed against her chest, were bone-white except for the fingertips, which had turned an alarming shade of blue-gray. Moving became the only option. Staying still meant becoming part of the frozen landscape, another nameless casualty claimed by mountains that devoured the unprepared. Mara forced herself upright through sheer determination, ignoring the way her vision swam and darkened at the edges. Her bare feet had gone completely numb during the night. She couldn't feel them at all when she stood, which was somehow more terrifying than pain would have been. The world tilted dangerously. She pressed one palm against the rock face for support while her body remembered how to balance, how to exist upright in space. Somewhere in the forest below, morning birds began their songs, cheerful sounds that seemed to mock her desperate situation. Life continued around her with beautiful, terrible normalcy while she clung to existence by increasingly thin threads. Water. Her father's voice echoed in memory, patient and kind during their long walks through Iron Peak territory. First rule of wilderness survival, little one, find water. A body can survive weeks without food, but only days without drinking. Animals know this, follow their trails, and you'll find what sustains life. Mara scanned her surroundings with eyes that refused to focus properly. Everything looked grey and hostile, rocks, trees, even the morning sky seemed leached of color. Then she spotted them, tracks pressed into frost-covered earth, the unmistakable pattern of deer hooves heading downslope. The animals had passed recently, their trail cutting through accumulated frost in a clear path toward lower elevation. Following the tracks required every ounce of concentration. Her numb feet betrayed her constantly, sending her stumbling over roots and stones she couldn't feel beneath her. Twice she fell completely, scraping her palms on rock and pine needles, the sharp pain in her hands a strange relief because it meant something in her body still functioned normally. The photograph remained secure in her bundle, pressed close to her chest like a talisman against the wilderness that wanted to claim her. The deer trail wound downward through increasingly dense forest, and after what felt like hours but was likely only 30 minutes, Mara heard it, the musical babble of running water. The sound pulled her forward with renewed urgency, her cracked lips already anticipating moisture. She half ran, half fell down the final slope, emerging beside a mountain stream that danced over smooth stones, ice forming at its edges but the center still flowing free. Mara collapsed at the water's edge, plunging her hands into the stream without thought. The shock of cold water against her frozen skin registered distantly. Everything was cold now, the boundaries between her body and the environment blurring dangerously. She cupped her hands, lifting water to her mouth, drinking in desperate gulps that hurt her throat as they went down. She drank until her stomach cramped with sudden fullness, until water dribbled down her chin and soaked the front of her dress. Only then did she remember the dented tin cup Gareth had thrown at her feet. It lay forgotten in her bundle with the photograph. She retrieved it with shaking hands, filled it from the stream, and drank more slowly this time, letting her body absorb the moisture it so desperately needed. The water helped. Not much, but enough that thinking became slightly easier, the fog in her mind clearing just enough to recognize how much danger she still faced. Hydration solved one problem but created new urgency around the others: food, warmth, shelter. Her stomach growled with violent hunger, having been empty for nearly 2 days now. Gareth's final generous meal had been table scraps 3 nights past, barely enough to sustain a child half her size. Mara searched the area around the stream with increasing desperation. Late autumn had stripped the landscape bare. No berries remained on bushes, no edible plants she recognized. Even the pine needles, which her father had once mentioned contained nutrients, made her retch when she tried chewing them, her empty stomach rejecting the bitter, resinous taste violently. She kept walking instead, following the stream southward because it seemed the only logical direction. North led toward higher peaks and worse weather. East and west offered nothing but endless forest. But south might eventually lead to lower elevations, to packed territories, to some form of civilization where a desperate child might find help. Or it might lead nowhere. The rational part of Mara's mind, the part that sounded like her mother's gentle wisdom, whispered the truth: she was dying. Not immediately, not in the next hour, but slowly, inevitably. Without food, without proper clothing, without shelter from the coming winter, her small body would simply stop functioning. It was mathematics, cold and cruel as the mountains themselves. 1 foot forward, Mara whispered to herself, her voice hoarse from crying and cold. Then the other foot. Then the first foot again. Her mother had said something similar during Mara's worst fevers, when sickness had made everything hurt and breathing felt impossible. When the pain feels endless, sweet one, you just focus on the next small thing. The next breath. The next moment. String enough moments together, and suddenly you've survived. But how many moments could she string together before the thread broke? The sun climbed higher, offering weak warmth that barely registered against her frozen skin. Mara's shadow stretched before her on the ground, too thin, too small, a ghost of a girl who might soon become an actual ghost. Her feet left occasional red smears on rocks where broken skin couldn't heal without proper food and rest. Each print marked her progress, a crimson trail that spoke of deterioration happening step by painful step. By midday, Mara could no longer feel her legs below the knees. She moved through a strange combination of muscle memory and desperate willpower, her body operating on autopilot while her mind drifted toward increasingly dangerous places. She found herself having conversations with the photograph, pulling it from her bundle to study her parents' faces as she walked. "Papa, am I walking the right way?" she asked the image, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mama, I'm trying to remember everything you taught me, but it's hard. Everything's hard." The faces in the photograph smiled back with eternal contentment, captured in a moment when their world had made sense, when being Omega hadn't meant being disposable. Mara's father had been a skilled tracker and hunter despite his designation. Respected within Iron Peak Pack for his abilities even if Pack lore denied him real status. Her mother had possessed gentle healing knowledge, caring for sick Pack members with herbs and patience. They'd been good people, valuable people, despite what Gareth claimed. They'd also been dead people, killed because territorial disputes didn't care about individual worth. Because being Omega in a world ruled by alpha strength meant your life held value only as long as someone more powerful decided it did. I miss you, Mara told the photograph, tears sliding down her cheeks to freeze almost immediately in the cold air. I miss you so much it hurts worse than being hungry. Worse than being cold. Is that normal? Will it always hurt this much? The photograph offered no answers, just those frozen smiles that had once meant safety and love. Sunset approached with terrifying speed, the short autumn day dying as the temperature plummeted toward nightfall. Mara found herself back beside the stream. Had she been walking in circles? The possibility seemed likely given how disoriented she'd become. Her vision kept blurring at the edges, dark spots dancing across her field of view like malevolent shadows. She collapsed without ceremony, her legs simply ceasing to function. One moment she was upright, the next she was on the ground beside the stream, unable to remember the falling part. The cold radiating up from the earth felt almost welcoming now, like an embrace from something ancient and patient that had been waiting for her all along. I'm sorry, Mara whispered, unsure if she was apologizing to her parents, to herself, or to the universe that had dealt her this impossible hand. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I couldn't survive what you survived. I'm sorry I'm Omega, like you, like Gareth said. I'm sorry I wasn't worth keeping. The words emerged between chattering teeth, each syllable requiring immense effort. Her fingers, still clutching the photograph, had stopped shaking, whether from improved circulation or because her body was shutting down, she couldn't tell. Everything felt distant now, wrapped in cotton and fog, reality itself becoming something theoretical rather than immediate. The stream babbled its endless song, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding on its banks. An owl called from the darkening forest, hunting sounds that meant life and death continuing their ancient dance. Somewhere wolves howled their evening greetings, those same wolves that had terrified her the previous night now seeming almost companionable. They were survivors, after all, perfectly adapted to this harsh landscape that was killing her with such efficiency. Mara closed her eyes, not planning to open them again. The darkness behind her eyelids felt warmer than the world outside, filled with half-remembered dreams of her mother's lullabies and her father's strong arms carrying her when she was too tired to walk. In memory, she was safe. In memory, she was loved. In memory, being Omega meant nothing except being herself. The cold didn't feel quite so terrible anymore. Her breathing slowed, each exhale taking longer than the last. Her fingers loosened slightly around the photograph, though even in surrender, she couldn't quite let it go completely. The darkness crept closer, patient and inevitable, until Mara couldn't tell whether her eyes were open or closed, whether she was still beside the stream or already somewhere else entirely. The last thing she registered was the distant sound of hoofbeats, but that seemed like another dream, another cruel trick of a mind that was already halfway to wherever dead Omegas went when the world finished using them up. 6 miles north of where a child lay dying beside a mountain stream, Edrin Vale urged his horse along the rocky ridge trail with practiced efficiency. The massive black stallion beneath him, a beast named Midnight that had cost more than most pack members earned in a year, moved with sure-footed confidence despite the treacherous terrain. Edrin rode as he did everything, with absolute competence and complete emotional detachment. At 35, Edrin commanded the largest territory in the northern lands through a combination of inherited wealth, strategic brilliance, and the kind of ruthless decision-making that made other alphas either fear or respect him. Vale Manor sprawled across 10,000 acres of prime timber and mining land, employed hundreds of pack members across 5 settlements, and generated enough wealth that Edrin could buy and sell most other territorial claims if he desired. He desired very little these days. Wealth had become merely numbers in ledgers. Power was simply the mechanism through which he maintained order. Life itself had flattened into a grey landscape where nothing truly registered. No joy, no sorrow, just the mechanical process of existing because stopping seemed like more effort than continuing. Today marked 7 years since Lionel died. 7 years since he'd held his mate's cooling hand while the midwife wept helplessly beside them. 7 years since he'd cradled his daughter, so impossibly tiny, her eyes that never opened, her lungs that couldn't quite manage breath in the winter storm that had prevented the healer from reaching them in time. He'd buried them together in the valley below this ridge, scattered their ashes across ground that would bloom with wildflowers come spring. Every year on this date, Edrin rode alone to this spot, stood at the edge looking down at where love had died, and felt nothing. The numbness was absolute. He couldn't even miss them properly anymore. Grief had burned itself out years ago, leaving only emptiness where emotions used to live. A grey wolf paced alongside Midnight, tongue lolling, amber eyes scanning the surrounding forest with predatory alertness. Kian, his beater and closest companion for nearly 20 years, knew better than to interrupt these anniversary rides with conversation. He simply maintained protective vigilance, understanding that Edrin needed the silence more than he'd ever admit. The path wound upward through ancient pines, their branches heavy with the season's first snow. Ice crunched beneath Midnight's hooves, the sound sharp in cold air that carried the scent of coming storms. Edrin breathed it in without pleasure or displeasure. It was simply air, cold and clean, moving in and out of lungs that continued functioning despite their owner's indifference. Part of him, a small, dark part that he never acknowledged in daylight, hoped each year for something dangerous to happen on these rides. Bandits, rival pack warriors, a hungry bear emerging from early hibernation. Something that would give him an excuse to fight, to bleed, to feel anything beyond this crushing absence of sensation. Violence at least had the benefit of being immediate and physical, requiring no emotional investment beyond survival instinct. But the forest remained peaceful, offering only winter silence and the distant calls of ravens settling for the night. Edrin was preparing to turn Midnight back toward the manor when Kian suddenly stopped, ears forward, body rigid with attention. The wolf's nose worked the air, and a low whine emerged from his throat, not aggression, but uncertainty, possibly concern. "What is it?" Edrin asked, his voice rough from disuse. He'd spoken perhaps 20 words total since leaving the manor that morning. Kian shifted, the transformation from wolf to human happening with fluid ease. Naked despite the cold, Kian was all lean muscle and sharp features, dark hair falling past his shoulders. Amber eyes still carrying the wolf's intensity. At 30, he'd been Edrin's beater for 15 years, and before that, his ward for 5. The bond between them ran deeper than pack hierarchy, forged through shared survival and mutual understanding of what it meant to be broken and rebuilt. "Something's wrong down there." Kian pointed toward the valley below, where the stream cut through forest like a silver thread in fading light. "I smell blood. Recent. And something else. Something that doesn't belong." Edrin pulled his brass spyglass from his thill bag, a relic from his merchant days before inheriting Vale territories, when he'd actually cared about building something meaningful. He scanned the valley systematically, searching for whatever had triggered Kian's instincts. Initially, he saw nothing unusual. Trees, rocks, the stream reflecting dying sunlight. Then movement caught his attention, or rather, the absence of expected movement. A dark shape lay beside the water, too still, too small to be a sleeping adult. He adjusted the spyglass, bringing the figure into sharper focus. A child. Female, perhaps 10 years old. Dark hair spread across rocks like spilled ink. Wearing nothing but a threadbare dress completely inadequate for the weather. Her bare feet, even from this distance, showed obvious injury. She wasn't moving at all, and for several long moments, Edrin assumed he was looking at a corpse. "Dead body," he said flatly, preparing to lower the spyglass and continue his ride. Dead things weren't his concern. The wilderness claimed the unprepared constantly, one more casualty changed nothing. No. Kian had shifted his vision, using his wolf senses to penetrate distance and failing light. Her heart still beating. Barely. Maybe an hour left, if that. Edrin looked again, studying the small form with professional detachment. She clutched something against her chest, a bundle of some kind, with the desperate grip of someone holding onto the last thing that mattered. Blood stained the rocks around her feet in patterns that suggested she'd been walking for some time before collapse. The pack scent clinging to her clothing, he could detect it even from this distance with alpha senses fully engaged, was days old, indicating deliberate abandonment rather than accidental separation. Someone had left this child to die. Chosen to bring her to wilderness and simply leave her where nature would finish what cruelty had started. His first instinct remained unchanged, not his problem. The world was full of suffering. He couldn't save everyone, couldn't even save the two people who'd mattered most. What made this abandoned child different from the 100 other tragedies happening across territories at this very moment? But he couldn't seem to make Midnight move. His hand on the reins remained frozen, the command to turn away lodged somewhere in his throat, refusing to emerge. Edrin. Kian's voice carried warning and something else, hope, maybe, or challenge. If you're going to walk away, do it now. But if there's any piece of you that's still human underneath all that carefully maintained ice, we ride. The word struck deeper than intended. Still human. Was he? 7 years of deliberate numbness, of refusing to feel anything, of treating life like a series of business transactions to be managed efficiently. Had he finally succeeded in killing everything soft inside himself? He looked at the child again through the spyglass. She'd shifted slightly, her fingers loosening on whatever she held. The dying light painted her in shades of grey and shadow, making her seem more ghost than living creature. In this particular angle, with her face turned slightly toward him despite the distance and fading visibility, she could have been. No. Edrin cut that thought off with brutal efficiency. She was not his daughter. His daughter was ash scattered across a valley floor, 7 years gone, beyond rescue or regret. This was simply another orphaned Omega, probably abandoned for good reason, certainly not his responsibility. Except his hand remained frozen on Midnight's reins. His eyes couldn't seem to look away from that small, still form. Get the emergency pack from the still bag, he heard himself say, voice rough with disuse and something that might have been emotion trying to claw its way past 7 years of carefully constructed walls. We're going down. Kian's relief was visible in the sudden loosening of his shoulders, though he was too experienced to comment on Edrin's decision. He simply retrieved the leather pack containing bandages, water flask, and the heavy wool blanket they carried for emergencies, then shifted back to wolf form for better mobility on the descent. The ridge trail offered no easy path downward. Edrin urged Midnight forward anyway, trusting the stallion's intelligence and sure footing more than his own judgment about what the hell he was doing and why. The horse picked its way down steep incline, occasionally sliding on loose scree, Edrin maintaining perfect balance through years of expert horsemanship and an alpha's enhanced physical control. Kian moved faster, the grey wolf practically flowing down the mountainside, reaching the stream a full 3 minutes before Edrin arrived. He'd shifted back to human form by the time Edrin dismounted, kneeling beside the child with hands that checked pulse points with professional efficiency. Alive, Kian confirmed, though his expression suggested it was a near thing. Severe hypothermia. She'll be dead in minutes if we don't warm her immediately. Edrin knelt on the child's other side, seeing up close what the spyglass had only hinted at. She was impossibly small, not just young, but malnourished, her body showing the signs of prolonged starvation. The dress she wore had once belonged to someone much larger, the fabric hanging off her thin frame in tears and patches. Her lips had gone blue, her skin carrying the grey pallor of advanced hypothermia. Blood seeped from torn feet that had walked far beyond reasonable endurance. Near her loosening fingers, partially visible from within a cloth bundle, he spotted a photograph. The edges were worn soft from constant handling, but the image remained clear enough, a family portrait showing 2 smiling adults with a baby. All Omegas, he could tell from the subtle markers in their features, the particular quality of their contentment that came from accepting places society assigned them. She's been deliberately abandoned, Kian said quietly, reading the evidence with Tracker's eyes. The pack scent on her clothes is 4, maybe 5 days old. No one separated from their group by accident stays lost that long without search parties finding them. White-hot rage flooded through Edrin with shocking intensity, the first real emotion he'd felt in 7 years beyond grief's crushing weight. Someone had looked at this child and decided her life held no value. Had brought her to wilderness and left her to die slowly, probably congratulating themselves on their mercy for not simply cutting her throat. The fury felt almost cleansing, burning through emotional numbness like fire through dead wood. He welcomed it, fed it, let it sharpen his focus into something useful. He stripped off his heavy fur-lined coat without hesitation, wrapping the child in its warmth. She weighed almost nothing, lifting her required barely any effort, as though she might simply float away if he loosened his grip. Her head lolled against his chest, unconscious, her breathing so shallow he could barely detect it. Send a runner ahead, Edrin commanded, mounting Midnight while cradling the child against him with one arm. Tell Ilara to prepare the medical wing. Full emergency measures. We ride hard. Kieran nodded and shifted, the grey wolf vanishing into darkening forest at a dead run. He'd reach Vale Manor in perhaps 40 minutes if he maintained that pace, enough time for Ilara to prepare, but only if the child survived the journey back. Edrin urged Midnight into a controlled gallop, maintaining balance while holding the child secure against his chest. Her heart beat against his, faint and irregular, threatening to stop with every labored breath. He found himself counting the beats, using them to mark time, to measure the distance between survival and death. Stay alive, he ordered her, voice carrying the same authority he used when commanding pack members. That's not a request. You will stay alive. She couldn't possibly hear him. Consciousness had fled, and her body was already halfway to shutting down. But Edrin repeated the command anyway, again and again, as though sheer willpower could anchor her to existence. As though choosing to save one broken child might somehow make up for the daughter he'd failed to save 7 years ago. The gates of Vale Manor rose before them like something from ancient legend, massive iron frameworks decorated with intricate wolf motifs, flanked by stone pillars that had witnessed generations of territorial power. Torches blazed along the approach despite the late hour, their flames bending in wind that carried the promise of harsher weather descending from mountain peaks. Midnight's hooves clattered against cobblestone as they passed through the gates into the estate proper. The manor itself sprawled across the landscape with architectural authority, 3 stories of weathered stone and timber construction, stained glass windows glowing with interior light, multiple chimneys releasing columns of smoke that spoke of warmth waiting inside. Gardens stretched in every direction despite the season's decline, their careful maintenance revealing wealth that could afford beauty even in autumn's dying days. Staff members materialized from doorways and outbuildings, drawn by Kian's advance warning. Servants in Vale household colors moved with practiced efficiency, their faces showing curiosity about the small bundle their alpha carried but discipline preventing questions. Grooms took Midnight's reins while Edrin dismounted, the child still cradled against his chest with one arm, her weight barely registering despite the journey's length. Inside, a woman's voice commanded from the main entrance, sharp with medical authority. Don't stand there gawking. Get him into the blue room immediately. Ilara descended the manor's front steps like a general marshalling troops for battle. Age had silvered her hair and added lines around her eyes, but 60 years hadn't diminished the fierce intelligence or the healer's instincts that had kept Vale family members alive through countless emergencies. She delivered Edrin himself 35 years past, had tried desperately to save Lionel and the baby 7 winters ago, had watched her young master transform from passionate youth into something cold and mechanical after grief had finished breaking him. Now she studied the unconscious child with a healer's assessment, her expression revealing nothing while her mind calculated survival odds. How long has she been hypothermic? Ilara asked, matching Edrin's pace as he carried Mara through the entrance hall, past family portraits and territorial maps that documented centuries of Vale dominance. Unknown. Possibly 24 hours or more. She was unconscious when we found her. Injuries. Severe damage to her feet from prolonged walking without shoes. Malnutrition. Dehydration. Possible internal organ stress from extended exposure. They climbed the sweeping main staircase, Edrin's boots leaving muddy prints on carpet that probably cost more than most pack members earned in months. Servants scattered before them, some rushing ahead to ensure the blue room was prepared according to Ilara's advance instructions. The blue room occupied the manor's east wing, positioned to catch morning sunlight and traditionally reserved for valued guests who required special attention. Its name came from the color scheme, walls painted in soft azure, curtains in deeper navy, bedding in patterns mixing various blue shades with cream accents. Firelight already danced in the hearth, filling the space with warmth that felt almost aggressive after hours in mountain cold. On the bed, Ilara directed, stripping off her outer shawl and rolling up sleeves with businesslike efficiency. Then step back and let me work. Edrin laid Mara down with surprising gentleness, his hands lingering a moment too long before he forced himself to move away. The child looked even smaller against the bed's expanse, swallowed by his massive coat that still wrapped around her like a cocoon. We need to warm her gradually, Ilara explained, primarily for the 2 younger servants who'd followed them inside carrying supplies. Too rapid warming can kill her as surely as the cold itself. Remove those rags she's wearing, carefully, the fabric may have frozen to her skin in places. The servants moved to comply while Elara prepared warm water and clean cloths, her movements precise despite their speed. Edrin found himself rooted near the doorway, unable to leave but uncertain why he felt compelled to stay. Kieran appeared beside him, now dressed in simple trousers and shirt, his presence a solid anchor point. "She'll live or she won't," Kieran said quietly, reading Edrin's unusual tension with beta accuracy. "Either way, you did what you could." "I did the minimum required not to be a complete monster." "You did more than most would. More than you've done for anyone in 7 years." The observation hung between them, uncomfortable in its accuracy. Edrin watched Elara work, saw the child's bare feet revealed as servants removed what remained of her dress, witnessed the extent of damage that abandonment and wilderness had inflicted on such a small body. Purple-black bruises mottled her skin. Her ribs showed through with heartbreaking clarity. The tears in her feet gaped open, infection already setting in around the edges despite the cold that had probably prevented worse bacterial growth. "How long was she out there?" Elara asked, not looking up from her examination. "Unknown. Days, possibly. She was abandoned deliberately." Elara's hands paused fractionally before resuming their work. "Someone will answer for that." It wasn't a question. Edrin merely nodded, filing the promise away for future action. First the child needed to survive. Then justice could follow. The first 48 hours existed in a liminal space between life and death where Mara's body fought battles her consciousness couldn't comprehend. Fever spiked and broke in alternating waves, her small frame shaking with chills one moment and burning with internal fire the next. Infection from her torn feet spread despite Elara's aggressive treatment, requiring poultices and tinctures that filled the blue room with herbal scents, yarrow for fever reduction, comfrey for tissue healing, elderflower for immune support. Edrin kept vigil in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. He'd pulled a chair beside the bed that first night and simply remained there, watching the child struggle for survival with the same intensity he'd once applied to business negotiations and territorial disputes. Elara had suggested he rest, that she'd summon him if anything changed. He'd ignored her completely. Kieran brought meals that went mostly untouched. Servants tended the fire and changed bedding around him as though he'd become another piece of furniture. Through it all, Edrin sat and watched this small stranger fight for continued existence, and something in that fight resonated with places inside him he'd thought had gone permanently numb. On the third morning, the fever finally broke. Mara's eyelids fluttered, consciousness returning in fragments, and her grey-green eyes opened to see a strange man sitting beside her bed. Panic flooded her expression instantly. Every adult in her life had brought pain or abandonment, and waking in an unfamiliar place with an unfamiliar alpha looming nearby triggered pure survival terror. She tried to scramble backward, got tangled in blankets that felt impossibly soft compared to anything she'd known, and tumbled out of bed entirely. She hit the floor hard enough to drive air from her lungs, but kept moving anyway, crawling toward the far corner with single-minded desperation. Edrin didn't move from his chair. Didn't reach for her, didn't raise his voice, didn't make any of the sudden movements that might escalate her panic into something worse. "You're safe," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same calm authority he'd used to settle spooked horses. "No one here will hurt you." She didn't believe him, her eyes said as much, wild and white-rimmed like a cornered animal's. She pressed herself into the corner, making her body as small as possible, chest heaving with rapid breaths that suggested she was seconds from hyperventilating. Elara appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of Mara's fall. She took in the situation with a single glance and moved forward with the slow, non-threatening approach of someone who understood trauma. "Child," Elara said gently, crouching several feet away to reduce her threatening profile. "You're at Vale Manor. You've been very ill. We found you on the mountain trail and brought you here to heal. That's all. No one will harm you, and no one will force you to do anything." Mara's gaze darted between Elara and Edrin, searching for deception, for the catch that experience had taught her always existed. Her breathing remained rapid but started to slow fractionally. "Are you hungry?" Elara asked. "I have warm broth. Good broth, with actual meat and vegetables. Would you like some?" The magic word, food. Mara's eyes widened, and despite her terror, despite every instinct screaming not to trust these strangers, her body's desperate hunger overrode caution. She managed a tiny nod. Elara fetched the broth herself, returning with a wooden bowl and spoon, still moving slowly and deliberately. She set the bowl on the floor within Mara's reach, then backed away to give space. Mara lunged for it with startling speed, grabbing the bowl and drinking directly from the rim, bypassing the spoon entirely. She drank so fast she choked, coughing violently, but couldn't seem to stop herself from drinking more the moment she caught her breath. Slowly, Ilara cautioned. Your stomach needs time to adjust. If you drink too fast, you'll just vomit it back up. Mara forced herself to slow down, though every swallow looked like a victory against instinct. When the bowl was empty, she clutched it against her chest as though someone might try to take it away, her eyes returning to Edrin with wary assessment. Over the following 4 days, a strange pattern emerged. Mara didn't speak. Trauma had apparently stolen her voice along with everything else. But she observed with intensity that suggested a sharp mind working behind those grey-green eyes. She watched Edrin particularly closely, tracking his movements whenever he entered the room, flinching slightly when he came too near but never fleeing again. By the second week, physical healing had progressed in ways that seemed miraculous given where Mara had started. The infection in her feet cleared completely under Ilara's relentless treatment, leaving pink scar tissue that would fade with time. Regular meals began filling out her hollow cheeks, returning color to skin that had gone gray with starvation. Ilara had fitted her with proper clothing, soft wool dresses in muted colors, thick stockings, leather boots lined with fur that actually fit her small feet. The transformation in her appearance was striking. Clean and properly clothed, with her dark hair washed and trimmed, she looked like a completely different child. But the emotional scars remained visible in every careful movement, every startled flinch at unexpected sounds, every moment she spent hoarding food under her pillow when she thought no one was watching. Ilara tried gentle intervention. Child, there's always more food here. You don't need to hide it. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, you'll have meals every day. I promise. Mara couldn't articulate that promises from adults meant nothing, that every meal in Gareth's house had been uncertain, that she'd learned survival meant saving every scrap against inevitable scarcity. She simply continued hoarding, continued preparing for the moment when kindness would inevitably end. But slowly, cautiously, she began venturing beyond the blue room's safety. Always with permission, always ready to bolt back if anything felt threatening, she explored the manor's corridors with wide-eyed wonder. The building itself was larger than her entire former pack settlement, filled with rooms that served purposes she couldn't even identify. Then she found the library. The double doors stood open one afternoon, revealing a space that stole Mara's breath completely. 2 stories tall, with a balcony running along the upper level, walls covered floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. More books than she'd known existed in the entire world, arranged on shelves that stretched toward a painted ceiling depicting wolves running beneath star-filled skies. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, creating pools of golden light on polished wooden floors. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, currently cold but bearing evidence of recent use. Comfortable chairs clustered in reading nooks, and a large desk sat beneath the main window, covered with papers and maps that suggested serious work happened here. Mara entered like someone stepping into sacred space, her bare feet making no sound against the floor. She approached the nearest shelf with trembling hands, running her fingers along leather spines without actually pulling anything free. The titles were in various languages, some she recognized, others completely foreign. You can read. The voice made her jump, spinning to find Edrin standing in the doorway. She hadn't heard him approach, and his sudden presence triggered automatic fear response. She pressed back against the bookshelf, making herself small. Edrin remained where he was, not advancing, keeping his posture deliberately non-threatening. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. I was simply surprised. Omega children are rarely taught letters. Mara's first instinct was silence, the safe option, the one that couldn't get her in trouble. But something about his genuine surprise, about the library itself, about the fact that he'd phrased it as a question rather than an accusation, loosened her tongue slightly. My mama taught me, she whispered, her voice hoarse from prolonged disuse. Before she died. The admission hung in the air between them. Edrin's expression shifted subtly, not pity exactly, but recognition of grief that mirrored his own. What happened to your parents? He asked gently, moving slowly to one of the chairs and sitting, making himself less physically imposing. The story emerged in halting fragments. The territorial dispute. Her father dying defending their cabin. Her mother's wounds that the healers couldn't fix. Gareth taking her in afterward but treating her like a burden. 3 months of sleeping in the barn and eating scraps. Then the wagon ride, the abandonment, the days alone in wilderness. Do you remember which pack? Edrin asked, his voice carefully controlled. Your uncle's full name. Mara hesitated, old lessons about trust and consequences warring with something that felt almost like safety in Edrin's measured responses. Gareth Ashwood, she finally admitted. Iron Peak Pack, in the Eastern Territories. Edrin filed the information away with the methodical precision of someone planning future action. Justice would wait, but it would come. For now, the child needed stability more than revenge. You're welcome to use the library whenever you wish, he said, changing the subject with deliberate gentleness. Any book you want to read. You don't need to ask permission. Mara's eyes widened with disbelief and hunger, for the books, for the implied trust, for the casual way he offered something that felt impossibly valuable. One warm afternoon, unseasonably mild for late autumn, Kieran found Mara sitting in the manor's garden, studying the ground with intense focus. He approached quietly, respecting her constant state of wariness, and settled himself on the stone bench several feet away. Looking for something specific, he asked conversationally. Mara pointed to tracks pressed into damp earth around the garden's edge. Fox, I think. From last night. But the prints are strange, too shallow in some places. Kieran leaned forward with genuine interest. Good eye. Fox tracks, yes. The shallow parts are where it was running versus walking. See how the toe pads barely register when it's moving fast. They spent the next hour talking about tracks, how to read them, what they revealed about animal behavior, how weather affected their clarity. Kieran shared tracker knowledge accumulated over 30 years, and Mara absorbed every word with the desperate intensity of someone starved for useful information. Why do you stay with Alpha Vale? Mara finally asked, the question that had been building since she'd started noticing the unusual dynamics of the household. Beaters usually lead their own packs. Kieran was quiet for a moment, weighing how much truth to share. Then he decided this child deserved honesty. She'd certainly experienced enough lies from other adults. Because 20 years ago, Edrin found me dying beside a road. I was 10 years old. Omega designation. Abandoned by my birth pack the same way you were abandoned. Mara's head snapped up, shock written across her face. You're, like me. I presented late, 13 instead of 12. And yes, Omega. Edrin found me, brought me here, raised me. When my designation became clear, he didn't send me away or sell me to a bonding house. He trained me, gave me responsibility, made me his beater despite every pack tradition saying that was impossible. But Omegas can't be beaters, Mara protested, repeating what she'd been taught her entire life. Everyone says. Edrin doesn't care what everyone says. He cares about loyalty, ability, character. Kieran's amber eyes held hers steadily. I've been his second for 15 years. Best beater he could have chosen, if I say so myself. The implications settled over Mara like a warm blanket. If Kieran, an Omega, could become beater, could hold real power and respect, then maybe designation didn't define destiny. Maybe she wasn't inherently worthless just because biology had marked her as Omega. Does he? Mara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Will he keep me? Or will I have to leave once I'm better? Kieran's expression softened with something like compassion. I don't know. Edrin doesn't make promises he can't keep, and he's been careful about attachments since his mate and daughter died. But I've watched him sit beside your bed for 3 straight days. I've seen him check on you every few hours even when Alara says you're stable. I've never seen him fight this hard to save someone. He paused significantly. That has to mean something. 3 weeks after her rescue, Mara stood in the manor stables beside Edrin, watching a young foal explore her stall with spindler-legged curiosity. The scent of hay and horse filled the space with earthy warmth, and autumn sunlight slanted through the open doors and golden bars. The foal approached Mara with innocent boldness, snuffling at her outstretched hand with velvet-soft nostrils. The sensation made Mara laugh, a sound of pure, unguarded delight that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. It was the first genuine laughter she'd produced since before her parents died, bright and clear and completely unself-conscious. Edrin stopped breathing. The The sound physically hurt, not with pain exactly, but with the shocking intensity of feeling something after years of carefully maintained numbness. Joy, sorrow, hope, fear, all crashed through his defensive walls at once, overwhelming in their combined force. "Can I pet her?" Mara asked, looking up at Edrin with an expression that mixed hope and uncertainty. "Her name is Shadow Mist," Edrin managed, his voice rougher than intended. "And yes. Here, let me show you." He guided Mara's small hand, demonstrating the proper way to stroke a horse's nose, how to move with confidence but gentleness. Shadow Mist leaned into the touch, clearly enjoying the attention, and Mara's smile widened with uncomplicated happiness. "She's beautiful," Mara whispered with reverent awe. The words created an opening Edrin hadn't planned, an impulse he couldn't quite control. "Would you like to learn to ride?" Mara's eyes went impossibly wide. "Really? You'd teach me?" "I would." The commitment emerged before Edrin fully processed its implications. That teaching her meant planning a future, meant acknowledging she'd be here long enough to learn, meant allowing attachment to form between them. Dangerous territory for someone who'd spent 7 years refusing exactly that kind of connection. But watching Mara smile, really smile, with her whole face, made the danger feel worthwhile. Vale Manor's household had settled into cautious routine over the past 4 weeks. Staff members no longer whispered quite so frantically when Mara passed through corridors, though their curiosity remained evident in sidelong glances and hastily stifled conversations. The child who'd arrived more corpse than living girl now walked the estate's halls with growing confidence, her healing feet encased in soft leather boots, her thin frame gradually filling out under Alara's watchful care and consistent meals. But peace in the Northern Territories never lasted long. Edrin stood in his study, reviewing timber contracts with the kind of focused attention that had built his empire, when Kian entered without knocking, a privilege reserved for emergencies or matters too urgent for formality. "We have a problem," Kian said, closing the heavy door behind him. "Town's talking." Loudly. Edrin set down his quill with deliberate precision. "They're always talking. What makes today different?" Agnes Milbrook cornered 3 different pack members at market this morning, demanding to know where that Omega girl came from. By noon, half of Silverpine had theories ranging from scandalous to completely absurd. The muscle in Edrin's jaw tightened. Agnes Milbrook ran Silverpine's general store with her husband Thomas, and she wielded gossip like other alphas wielded territorial authority. Her speculation could poison public opinion faster than winter storms blanketed mountains. "What theories?" Edrin asked, though he suspected he already knew. Kian's expression darkened. "Some claim she's your hidden daughter from before Lionel. Others suggest you're grooming her for future bonding once she presents fully." He paused, disgust evident in every word. "The kindest interpretation being circulated is that grief has finally broken your mind completely, and you've adopted a replacement daughter out of delusion." Rage flickered through Edrin's chest, controlled, but present. The first suggestion was merely ignorant. The second was vile enough that under different circumstances, he'd have challenged anyone voicing it publicly. The third carried its own insult wrapped in false sympathy. "I don't care what they think about me," Edrin said quietly, dangerously. "But Mara will hear these rumors eventually," Kian interrupted. "Children always do. And when she does, she'll believe she's causing you trouble simply by existing." The observation struck true. Mara had already demonstrated a tendency towards self-blame, hoarding guilt like others hoarded coins, convinced that her presence burdened everyone around her. Learning that her existence invited scandal would devastate her fragile sense of security. Arrange for the monthly pack meeting, Edrin decided. "Tomorrow evening. I'll address this directly." "You're sure?" Public declaration might escalate matters rather than calm them. "Let it escalate. Better they know exactly where I stand than continue spreading poison while I remain silent." Kian nodded, recognizing the tone that meant Edrin's mind was set. "I'll send runners. Every pack leader within riding distance will receive notice." After Kian departed, Edrin sat alone in his study, staring at timber contracts that no longer held his attention. The protective fury he'd felt upon finding Mara had evolved into something more complex, a fierce determination that surprised him with its intensity. This child, who'd been discarded like refuse, who'd survived impossible odds through pure stubborn refusal to die, deserved better than becoming fodder for small-minded gossip. She deserved protection. Safety. The kind of unwavering advocacy he'd failed to provide his own daughter. The thought still hurt, that sharp, familiar ache that never quite faded. But for the first time in 7 years, grief carried company. Purpose walked alongside sorrow, giving pain a direction, a use. Upstairs in the library, Mara sat curled in the window seat that had become her favorite refuge, a book of botanical illustrations open across her lap. She'd progressed from fairy tales to more complex texts, her hunger for learning insatiable now that books were freely available. The afternoon sun painted golden rectangles across aged floorboards while she studied detailed drawings of mountain flowers, memoizing their names and properties with the same intensity she'd once applied to survival. "That's Foxglove," Ilara's voice came from the doorway. The healer entered carrying a tea tray, her movements efficient despite advancing age. "Beautiful but deadly. Every part of the plant contains poison strong enough to stop a heart." Mara traced the illustration with one careful finger. Why would anyone grow something so dangerous? Because in tiny, precise doses, foxglove can also heal hearts that beat irregularly. Medicine and poison often share the same source. The difference lies in knowledge and intention. Ilara set the tea tray on a nearby table, pouring 2 cups with practiced ease. She'd taken to joining Mara for afternoon tea, these quiet hours becoming as much routine as treatment. The child needed consistent, gentle company more than she needed further medical intervention. "You've been quiet today," Ilara observed, settling into the chair opposite Mara's window seat. "Something troubling you?" Mara closed the book slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I heard the maids talking this morning. They didn't know I was in the next room." She paused, choosing words carefully. "They said people in town think I'm wrong somehow. That Alpha Vale shouldn't keep me here." Ilara's features tightened with controlled anger. "Those maids will find themselves reassigned to less comfortable duties." "What exactly did they say?" "That Omegas don't belong in grand houses. That Alpha Vale is wasting resources on someone worthless." Mara's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly where they gripped the closed book. "They are not wrong. I am Omega. And this house is very grand. Maybe I should." "Stop." Ilara's command carried the same authority she used when treating resistant patients. "Listen carefully, child, because I'm only saying this once. Your designation, Omega, Beta, Alpha, it makes no difference, doesn't determine your worth. Edrin Vale is the wealthiest, most powerful Alpha in these territories, and he doesn't waste resources on anything or anyone he doesn't value. If he says you belong here, then you belong here. Anyone suggesting otherwise can take their opinions straight to hell." The blunt vulgarity startled a laugh from Mara, brief, surprised, but genuine. Ilara rarely cursed, and hearing such rough language delivered in her cultured tones created jarring contrast. "Now drink your tea before it gets cold," Ilara continued, her voice returning to its normal gentle firmness. "And stop letting ignorant gossip poison your thinking. You're smarter than that." Mara accepted the teacup, letting its warmth seep into her palms. But what if the gossip makes trouble for Alpha Vale? What if the Pack Council? The Pack Council can mind their own territories and stay out of ours. But even as Ilara spoke the reassuring words, both of them knew that Pack Council authority superseded individual Alpha rule in matters of Pack law and tradition. If the Council decided Edrin's guardianship of Mara violated some statute or custom, they possessed power to intervene. That intervention arrived the following afternoon. Edrin had just finished addressing the assembled pack leaders in Silverpine's Great Hall, a speech delivered with characteristic directness, declaring Mara his ward under formal protection, warning that anyone spreading malicious rumors would answer to him personally, when a rider approached bearing the Pack Council's seal. The message was brief and absolute. Councillor Thorne would arrive at Vale Manor within 3 days to assess the situation regarding the Omega child in question. The council required assurance that proper protocols were being followed and that the child's welfare aligned with Pack interests. Kieran read the message over Edrin's shoulder, his expression grim. Thorne. Of course they'd send him. Alpha Councillor Marcus Thorne represented everything Edrin despised about traditional Pack hierarchy, rigid adherence to outdated customs, contempt for anyone designated Omega, and absolute conviction that his interpretation of Pack law superseded individual Alpha authority. At 62, Thorn had sat on the Pack Council for 30 years, wielding his position like a weapon against anyone who challenged established order. He'll try to take her, Edrin said quietly, fury turning his words to ice. He'll claim impropriety, cite some obscure statute about unmated alphas and unrelated Omega children, and demand she be removed to Pack custody. Probably. Kian's agreement carried no comfort. Which gives us 3 days to prepare a defense that doesn't rely solely on because I said so, however satisfying that response might be. Edrin's mind raced through possibilities, discarding options as quickly as they formed. Simple guardianship carried no legal weight without blood relation or formal Pack bonds. Adoption didn't exist in Pack law. Children belonged to their both packs unless claimed through mating contracts or territorial agreements. He couldn't simply declare Mara his daughter and expect the council to accept it. Unless. The true claim right, Edrin said slowly, the idea crystallizing even as he spoke it. It's ancient, rarely used, but it's recognized in Pack law. Kian's eyes widened. True claim requires witnesses, formal ceremony, and council presence. You'd be gambling everything on them accepting the claim rather than rejecting it outright. If they reject it, they'll take her anyway. At least this way, we fight on our terms. And if the claim succeeds? True claim is permanent, Edrin. Magical binding that can't be undone. She becomes your heir legally, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Your territories, your wealth, everything transfers to her upon your death. Are you prepared for that? Edrin didn't hesitate. Yes. The single word carried absolute conviction. Somewhere during the past 5 weeks, this broken child he'd saved on impulse had become something more than temporary responsibility. She'd become his second chance, not at replacing what he'd lost, but at choosing differently, at protecting what mattered instead of retreating into numbness. Then we have 3 days to prepare her, Kian said. Thorn will question her directly, try to intimidate her, look for any excuse to declare the claim invalid. She needs to be ready. Upstairs in her room, Mara stood at the window watching evening settle across Vale Manor's grounds, unaware that her future, and Edrin's, hung in balance, waiting for a confrontation that would determine whether love could triumph over law, whether choice held more power than tradition, whether one broken alpha and one abandoned omega could forge family from nothing but stubborn refusal to surrender. Mara pressed her face against the library window, watching snow begin to fall in thick, heavy flakes that promised significant accumulation. 2 days had passed since Kian had explained what true claim meant, and 1 day remained before Councillor Thorn's arrival. The weight of impending judgment sat heavy in her chest, making breathing difficult despite Ilara's assurances that everything would work out fine. Adults lied when they thought it would make children feel better. Mara had learned that lesson thoroughly. Behind her, Edrin worked at the library desk, reviewing territorial law documents with Kian's help, searching for precedents that might strengthen their position before the council. They'd been at it for hours, their low voices creating constant background murmur that Mara had stopped trying to follow. Legal language made little sense to her anyway, all those formal words that seemed designed to obscure meaning rather than clarify it. The Rivermark precedent from 40 years ago might apply, Kian was saying. Alpha Steel successfully claimed an unrelated beta child after different circumstances, Edrin interrupted, frustration evident in his tone. Steele's ward was blood-related to his deceased mate. Thorn will argue the connection provided legitimacy our situation lacks. Mara turned from the window, studying Edrin's profile as he bent over aged documents. He looked tired, not physically exhausted, but worn down by weight of fighting battles that shouldn't exist. All because he'd chosen to save her that evening on the ridge. All because he'd been kind when kindness wasn't required. The guilt had been building for days, fed by overheard conversations and the mounting tension filling Vale Manor. Staff members whispered anxiously when they thought no one listened. Ilara's smiles carried forced cheerfulness that fooled no one. Even Kian, usually unflappable, showed signs of stress in the tightness around his eyes. She was the problem. Her existence here invited scrutiny, created vulnerability, threatened everything Edrin had built. The solution seemed obvious, written clearly in every whispered conversation and worried glance. She needed to leave. The decision settled over Mara with strange calm, like the snow settling over the grounds outside, quiet, inevitable, transforming the landscape into something different than before. If she disappeared, Counselor Thorne would have no reason to question Edrin's judgment. The gossip would fade. Everything would return to normal. Edrin would be safe. That mattered more than her own comfort, more than the security she'd found here, more than the growing feeling that maybe, just maybe, she'd found somewhere she belonged. Loving someone meant protecting them, even if protection required sacrifice. Her mother had taught her that, demonstrated it with final breaths spent reassuring Mara rather than mourning her own approaching death. "I'm going to rest before dinner," Mara announced, her voice steady despite the lie. "My head hurts a little." Edrin looked up immediately, concern replacing concentration. "Do you need a Lara? If you're feeling ill." "Just tired," Mara interrupted, offering her most convincing smile. "Really, I'm fine. Just need to lie down for a bit." She left before either of them could question further, climbing stairs toward her room with measured steps that gave no hint of the plan forming in her mind. In her chamber, she moved with quiet efficiency, gathering her few possessions into the same cloth bundle she'd arrived with, now clean and mended. The photograph went in first, wrapped carefully in a silk handkerchief Alara had given her. 2 changes of clothes followed, along with the warmest cloak from her wardrobe. From the kitchen, she stole food, dried meat, hard cheese, bread wrapped in cloth, a full water flask. Enough for several days if she rationed carefully. Her feet had healed completely, and the boots Edrin had commissioned for her would protect against snow and cold far better than bare skin. She was prepared this time. Not like before, when Gareth had dumped her with nothing. This time she'd survive, find her way to some distant settlement, maybe work as a kitchen servant or stable hand. Omegas could always find labor no one else wanted. She'd learned enough from her mother about healing herbs, perhaps some pack would value that knowledge enough to offer shelter. The lie felt hollow even as she constructed it. But the alternative, staying here, watching Edrin fight battles she'd created, eventually seeing Counselor Thorne drag her away while Edrin stood powerless, that was unbearable. Better to leave on her own terms. Better to choose. She waited until full darkness, until the household settled into sleep rhythms she'd learned to recognize. Then she slipped from her room, moving through shadowed corridors with the caution that had kept her alive in Gareth's household. Down the servants' stairs, through the kitchen where dying embers provided only minimal light, out the garden door that opened silently thanks to hinges Kian kept well oiled. The snow had intensified, wind driving flakes nearly horizontal. Mara pulled her cloak tight and started walking. Heading south away from the manor, into forest that swallowed her small form within minutes. She didn't see Kian watching from his window, amber eyes tracking her progress with wolf-sharp vision. Didn't know he was already moving to wake Edrin, his expression grim with understanding and regret. In his chamber, Edrin came awake instantly when Kian entered. 7 years of sleeping alone had made him sensitive to any disruption, any change in the night's rhythm. "She's running," Kian said without preamble. "South, into the forest. Maybe 20 minutes ago based on track depth." The words hit Edrin like physical blows, driving air from his lungs. For one horrible moment, he couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the crushing realization that he'd failed again, failed to make Mara feel safe enough to stay, failed to protect her from fear that drove her into winter darkness. Then training and 7 years of alpha authority reasserted themselves. Panic transformed into cold, focused purpose. "How bad is the weather?" he demanded, already pulling on clothes. "Getting worse fast. Storm front moving in from the north, the one we've been watching. By dawn, we'll have whiteout conditions." Edrin cursed with vicious precision. "She can't survive that. Even with proper gear and experience, this storm will kill anyone caught in it." "I know." Kian was already dressed for pursuit, heavy winter gear that would provide some protection against elements that cared nothing for pack hierarchy or alpha strength. "We need to move now, before the trail completely disappears." They shifted to wolf form in the courtyard, their transformation simultaneous and practiced. Edrin's massive black wolf stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, built for power and endurance. Kian's grey wolf was lighter, faster, better suited for tracking. Together they plunged into the storm, following Mara's fading scent with desperate urgency. The snow fell so thick it seemed solid, transforming the world into endless white punctuated only by dark tree trunks. Mara's tracks showed clearly at first, small boot prints heading determinedly south, but fresh snow filled them rapidly, erasing evidence of her passage with alarming speed. Edrin pushed forward with single-minded intensity, ignoring cold that penetrated even his thick fur, disregarding the ice forming around his muzzle from frozen breath. Nothing mattered except finding Mara before the storm claimed her. Not his own safety, not the council's impending arrival, not anything beyond the child who'd somehow become the center of his carefully reconstructed world. They'd been hunting for perhaps 2 hours when Kian's howl cut through wind-driven snow, not the hunting call, but alarm, urgency, discovery. Edrin changed direction instantly, powerful legs driving through deepening drifts toward where Kian's grey form waited beside a dark shape half buried in fresh accumulation. Mara collapsed beside a stream she'd probably been following south, her small body already partially covered by snow that would have buried her completely within another hour. She was conscious, barely, shivering so violently her teeth chattered audibly even through the storm's howling. Edrin shifted back to human form, ignoring the savage cold biting his bare skin. He dropped to his knees beside her, hands shaking, from cold or emotion, he couldn't tell, as he pulled her upright against his chest. Why? The word emerged harsh, broken. Why did you run? Mara's eyes focused on him with difficulty, her pupils dilated from hypothermia and fear. They'll take you away from me, she whispered, each word requiring visible effort. The council. Councillor Thorn. They'll hurt you because of me. Everyone I love dies or gets hurt because of me. I won't let that happen to you. The confession, everyone I love, struck Edrin with the force of revelation. This child, who'd known him only 5 weeks, loved him. Had run into lethal weather rather than risk causing him harm. 7 years of carefully maintained emotional walls shattered completely. Edrin pulled Mara tight against him, wrapping his body around hers, feeling her fragile heartbeat against his chest while his own heart threatened to break from the weight of feeling too much after years of feeling nothing. Listen to me. His voice came out fierce, raw with emotion he could no longer contain. I found you dying. I chose to save you. That was my choice. Everything since then, keeping you, protecting you, fighting for you, those are my choices. Mine. You don't get to take that away from me by running. But the council. To hell with the council. The words emerged as something between command and prayer. To hell with pack law. To hell with anyone who thinks they can take you from me. He was shaking now too, not from cold, but from the magnitude of truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. I lost my daughter 7 years ago. I thought I'd never feel anything again. Then I found you. You brought me back to life, Mara. I won't survive losing you. Do you understand? She sobbed against his chest, her small body racked with more than just cold. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I won't leave again. I promise I won't. Good. Edrin's arms tightened around her. Because I'm never letting you go. But the storm cared nothing for emotional revelations or promises made in desperation. Wind shrieked through the trees with renewed fury, driving snow so thick that visibility dropped to mere feet. Temperature plummeted further as the full force of the northern front arrived, transforming the forest into a killing ground where even wolves struggled to survive. Kian, still in wolf form, whined urgently, the sound carrying clear meaning to anyone who understood pack communication. They couldn't make it back to the manor. Not in this weather, not with Edrin already hypothermic from shifting in extreme cold, not with Mara barely conscious. They needed shelter immediately, or all 3 of them would die before dawn. Edrin's survival instincts, honed through decades of territorial leadership and wilderness navigation, overrode the emotional chaos threatening to overwhelm him. He forced his mind into cold, tactical assessment even as his body trembled from hypothermia's advancing grip. They had minutes, not hours, before the cold claimed all 3 of them. Cave, he gasped through chattering teeth, pulling Mara tighter against his chest. Kian, find shelter. Now. The grey wolf vanished into the white maelstrom, nose working frantically despite snow that clogged his nostrils. Edrin remained motionless, conserving what little body heat remained, using his larger frame to shield Mara from wind that sought to strip warmth from anything living. She'd stopped shivering. That terrified him more than the violent tremors had. Her body was shutting down, abandoning the fight to generate heat. He rubbed her arms, her back, trying to stimulate circulation, knowing the gesture was probably futile but unable to simply do nothing while she slipped away. Kian's howl pierced the storm, triumph and urgency combined. Edrin stumbled to his feet, Mara cradled against his chest, following the sound through snow that had already erased any visible trail. His bare feet had gone completely numb, each step a gamble that his legs would support his weight rather than collapse beneath him. The cave entrance appeared like salvation from a half-remembered prayer, a dark opening in a rocky outcropping, shallow but sufficient to block the wind's worst fury. Edrin practically fell through the entrance, his legs finally giving out once they'd reached relative safety. He landed on his knees, still clutching Mara, every muscle locked rigid from cold. Kieran shifted to human form, his lean body shaking violently but still functional. I'll gather firewood. Whatever's dry enough to burn. Hurry. Edrin's voice barely qualified as sound, more breath than word. Alone with Mara, Edrin forced his frozen hands to work, stripping off her wet cloak and outer layers with clumsy movements that took 3 times longer than they should have. The dry clothes in her bundle, she'd planned this, prepared for survival, became insulation against her skin. He wrapped her in his coat, then in the emergency blanket from his own pack, creating layers between her and the killing cold. She stirred slightly, consciousness flickering. Papa. The word emerged slurred, confused. Papa, I'm cold. The word, Papa, hit Edrin like a physical blow. She'd never called him that before. Always Alpha Vale or, more recently, Sir when she felt particularly formal. But now, with her mind fogged by hypothermia and fear, the truth emerged. She saw him as father, had perhaps seen him that way for weeks without knowing how to express it. I know, sweetheart. The endearment felt foreign on his tongue, rusty from disuse. I know you're cold. We're going to fix that. I promise. Kieran returned with an armful of relatively dry wood and kindling stripped from the underside of fallen logs where snow hadn't yet penetrated. His hands shook so badly that lighting the fire required 3 attempts, the flint and steel slipping from numb fingers before finally producing sparks that caught in prepared tinder. The tiny flame grew with agonizing slowness, fed carefully with small twigs, then larger branches, until finally a modest fire pushed back the darkness and began radiating precious warmth. It wasn't much. The cave was too shallow and drafty for the fire to raise the temperature significantly, but it was enough. Enough to stop the dying, if not enough to make them comfortable. You need the fire more than I do, Kieran said, gesturing Edrin closer to the flames. You shifted in this weather. That was incredibly stupid. I know. Edrin didn't move away from Mara, continuing to share what body heat he could generate. But I'd do it again. I know you would. That's what worries me. They sat in silence for long minutes, the only sounds the fire's crackle and the storm's fury beyond their fragile shelter. Gradually, painfully, warmth began returning to Edrin's extremities, first as numbness, then as vicious pins and needles sensation that made him bite back curses. His feet, when he finally looked at them, showed the white patches of frostbite on several toes. Mara stirred against his chest, her shivering returning, a good sign, indicating her body was fighting again rather than surrendering. What about you? She whispered, noticing his shaking for the first time. You're freezing too. I'll be fine. No. She struggled weakly against his hold. We keep each other warm. Both of us. Together. That's what you said, we saved each other. So we survived together too. The simple logic carried undeniable truth. Edrin shifted position, wrapping them both in the emergency blanket, creating a cocoon of shared heat while Kieran tended the fire and kept watch. 2 broken people clinging to each other in a storm, refusing to let go, refusing to surrender. They survived the night through sheer stubborn determination and Kieran's tireless vigilance. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed into pristine white punctuated by blue shadows. The sun emerged with blinding intensity, reflecting off fresh snow until looking at the world required squinted eyes or blindness. Kieran found them at first light, his grey wolf form appearing through morning mist like a guardian spirit. He'd shifted to scout their surroundings, assess the damage, determine whether they could safely return to the manor. His transformation back to human carried good news. The trail was passable, barely, and help was already coming. Edrin had sent riders before departing, contingency planning even in crisis. Now those riders returned with supplies, fresh horses, and Alara's medical kit. The healer herself arrived within the hour, her expression oscillating between relief at finding them alive and fury at their recklessness. "You shifted in a blizzard," she said flatly, examining Edrin's frost-bitten feet with professional detachment. "You're lucky you're only losing toenails instead of entire toes." "I know. And you?" Ilara turned to Mara, her voice gentling despite obvious anger. "Running into a storm because you thought it would protect someone else? That's not love, child. That's suicide wearing love's mask." Mara flinched but met Ilara's gaze. "I couldn't let them hurt him because of me." "Then you fight beside him instead of running away. That's what family does. They stand together." The word, family, hung in the cold air, carrying weight beyond its simple syllables. Edrin and Mara looked at each other, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended spoken language. "We need to get back," Kian said, practical as always. "Councillor Thorne arrives this evening. We have perhaps 8 hours to prepare." The ride back to Vale Manor took 3 hours through snow-clogged trails. Edrin and Mara shared a horse, neither willing to separate after coming so close to permanent loss. The estate appeared like a fortress rising from winter landscape, stone walls promising safety and warmth. But safety was temporary. The real battle waited in polished council chambers and legal arguments, in the clash between individual choice and pack tradition. That evening, Silverpine's great hall filled to capacity with pack leaders, curious citizens, and the 5 members of the pack council. Councillor Thorne presided from the central seat, his weathered face carrying the rigid certainty of someone who'd never questioned his own righteousness. At 62, he embodied everything traditional pack hierarchy valued: strength, authority, absolute conviction that Omegas existed to serve rather than thrive. Edrin entered with Mara at his side and Kian one step behind, walking like warriors approaching battle. The assembled crowd fell silent, hundreds of eyes tracking their progress toward the council's platform. "Alpha Edrin Vale," Thorne's voice carried formal weight. "You stand before this council to justify your unprecedented claim of guardianship over an unrelated Omega child. The council must determine whether this arrangement serves pack interests or violates established law." "I understand the council's authority," Edrin replied, his tone carrying equal formality and barely concealed challenge. "I'm prepared to defend my position." Thorne's attention shifted to Mara. "Child, state your name and origin for the record." Mara's voice emerged steady despite obvious nervousness. "Mara Ashwood. Born to Liam and Sarah Ashwood of Iron Peak Pack in the Eastern Territories. Both my parents were Omega. Both are dead." "And your uncle, Gareth Ashwood, is he also deceased?" "No, sir. He abandoned me on a mountain trail 5 weeks ago. Said I was worthless because I'd present as Omega like my parents." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Abandoning pack family, especially children, violated fundamental pack law, carrying severe penalties. "These are serious accusations," Thorne said, though his expression suggested skepticism. "Why should Alpha Vale, a wealthy unmated alpha, take responsibility for you? What makes you worthy of such unprecedented protection?" The question carried implied insult, suggesting Mara's worth required justification. She lifted her chin, meeting Thorne's gaze directly. "I don't know if I'm worthy of Alpha Vale. But he saved my life when he didn't have to. He's given me home, education, kindness I didn't know existed. I don't know what makes me worthy of him. But I'll spend my life trying to be." Pretty words, Thorne dismissed. "Alpha Vale, you are unmated, wealthy, and could secure any heir you desire through traditional channels. Why this child specifically?" Edrin's response came without hesitation. "Because she needed saving, and I needed a reason to live. Because she's demonstrated more courage and loyalty in 5 weeks than most pack members show in lifetimes. Because when I look at her, I see the daughter I lost, not a replacement, but a second chance. Because love isn't about blood or designation. It's about choice. And I choose her." Before Thorne could respond, a voice rang out from the gallery. "I challenge this claim." Gareth Ashwood stepped forward, his brutal features arranged in false concern. Mara instinctively pressed closer to Edrin, terror flooding her system at seeing her uncle again. "The child is my blood kin," Gareth announced. "Pack law gives me primary claim to custody. I was testing her strength by leaving her on that trail. Clearly she passed, since a powerful alpha found her worthy of rescue. But she remains my responsibility. The lie was transparent but legally viable. Edrin felt rage building in his chest, controlled but dangerous. You abandoned her to die. You have no claim. That's your interpretation, Gareth countered smoothly. I say I was preparing her for the harsh realities of pack life. Either way, blood supersedes sentiment. Kieran stepped forward. I invoke right of witness. I testify that Gareth Ashwood deliberately abandoned Mara with no supplies, no protection, in freezing weather with intent to cause her death, not test her character. Gareth sneered. Your Omega. Your testimony means nothing. Then hear mine. A new voice joined the debate. Alpha Councillor Devon, the youngest council member at 45, rising from his seat. I've reviewed evidence from multiple sources. Alpha Vale has demonstrated consistent care and proper guardianship. Gareth Ashwood's actions constitute criminal abandonment. The law is clear. Thorne's expression darkened. Councillor Devon, you overstep. I follow the law, Devon interrupted firmly, which you seem inclined to ignore when it conflicts with your prejudices about designation and tradition. The accusation hung heavy in sudden silence. Thorne's face flushed with anger, but he couldn't deny the challenge without revealing his bias. The council will vote, Thorne declared. All in favor of allowing Alpha Vale to proceed with true claim ceremony. 3 hands rose, Devon's immediately, followed more slowly by 2 others who'd clearly been swayed by the evidence. 2 remained down, including Thorne's. The motion carries, Devon announced. Alpha Vale, you may proceed with the ritual. The true claim ceremony required ancient words and sacred action. A ceremonial blade was brought forward, silver, etched with runes from the old pack languages that predated written law. Edrin accepted it with steady hands, then turned to face Mara. This is your choice, he said quietly, speaking only to her despite hundreds watching. If you take this blade and cut your palm, we become bound. I become your father in law, magic, and blood. You become my daughter, my heir, inheriting everything I possess. The bond cannot be undone. Ever. You must choose freely. Mara didn't hesitate. She reached for the blade, holding Edrin's gaze while she drew the sharp edge across her palm. Blood welled bright against pale skin. Edrin cut his own palm with equal deliberation, then clasped her smaller hand in his. Blood mingled, and power flowed, visible as golden light wrapping around their joined hands, pulsing with ancient magic that recognized truth when spoken and choice when made freely. The ritual words came from deep memory, passed down through generations of pack leaders. I claim you as mine. Blood of my blood. Heart of my heart. From this day until the end of days. Mara repeated the response, her voice clear and certain. I accept your claim. I am yours. Daughter to father. From this day until the end of days. The light intensified, then faded, leaving behind a subtle glow visible only to those with magical sight. The bond was sealed, permanent and unbreakable. Thorne stood, his face rigid with displeasure. The council recognizes the true claim. Mara Ashwood is now Mara Vale, legal heir to Vale territories and holdings. The words emerged grudging, forced by law he couldn't circumvent. The assembled crowd erupted, some in approval, others in shock, all recognizing they'd witnessed something unprecedented. An unmated alpha claiming an unrelated Omega child as legal heir, using ancient magic to forge family from choice rather than blood. Edrin pulled Mara into an embrace, feeling her arms wrap tight around him, hearing her whisper Papa against his chest. 7 years of grief didn't disappear, that wound would always exist, but it no longer consumed everything. Room had been made for new love, different love, chosen love that healed even as it honored what had been lost. If this story of love conquering law touched your heart, click subscribe and the bell icon so you never miss another tale of found family and second chances. Share this video with anyone who needs to remember that family isn't always about blood, sometimes it's about the people who choose to save us when the world gives up. What would you do if you found someone abandoned and alone? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you for staying until the end of Mara and Edrin's journey. Remember, you're stronger than you know, and you deserve people who choose you every single day. 6 months later. Spring transformed Vale Manor's grounds into a celebration of renewal. Snow melted into streams that fed wildflower meadows, and trees burst into leaf with almost aggressive enthusiasm. The gardens Lionel had designed so long ago bloomed again under the attentive care of staff who'd rediscovered purpose in maintaining beauty rather than just preserving memory. Mara sat astride Shadow Mist in the manor's training ring, the young mare responding to her gentle guidance with growing confidence. 6 months of proper nutrition, consistent care, and genuine happiness had transformed the hollow-cheeked waif into a thriving 11-year-old. She'd grown 3 inches, gained healthy weight, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd survived impossible odds and emerged stronger. Heels down, Kieran called from the fence line, watching her practice with instructor's critical eye. And keep your hands steady. She'll respond better to gentle pressure than yanking. Mara adjusted her position, feeling the mare settle beneath her. Riding had become her favorite activity, the partnership between horse and rider, the trust required, the freedom of movement through open spaces. Shadow Mist had become more than a mount. She was a friend who asked nothing except care and consistency. Edrin watched from the manor's terrace, a tea service laid out beside him that he actually used now instead of letting it grow cold while he worked. The transformation in him matched Mara's. He smiled more, laughed occasionally. Engaged with his pack in territories with renewed energy. The cold, distant alpha had thawed, replaced by someone who remembered how to live rather than merely exist. The Pack Council had attempted several more interventions over the past months, each one less aggressive than the last as they recognized that public opinion had shifted decisively in Edrin's favor. The story of the abandoned Omega girl and the wealthy alpha who'd claimed her as daughter had spread across territories, inspiring both admiration and imitation. 3 other alphas had invoked true claim for unrelated children, citing the Vale precedent. Gareth Ashwood had faced justice. The council stripped him of his beta status for criminal abandonment, and Iron Peak Pack exiled him from their territories. Last anyone had heard, he was working as a common laborer in the southern settlements, his reputation destroyed beyond any hope of rehabilitation. Papa. Mara's voice carried across the grounds as she guided Shadow Mist from the training ring toward the terrace. Did you see? I managed the full circuit without Kian having to correct me once. I saw. Edrin smiled, the expression coming easily now. You're becoming an excellent rider. She dismounted with improving grace, handing Shadow Mist's reins to a waiting stable hand before joining Edrin at the tea service. At 11, she still looked young for her age, but the haunted quality had vanished from her eyes. She moved with purpose, spoke with confidence, and studied with voracious hunger. Tutors reported she was advancing faster than students years older. There's a letter from the eastern settlements, Edrin said, gesturing to the envelope beside his cup. The new school they're building wants to know if you'd consider attending when it opens next year. Mara's eyes widened. A real school? With other students? The first school in the territories that accepts students regardless of designation. Omegas, Betas, Alphas, all learning together. Revolutionary, really. She picked up the letter, reading it carefully. The school's headmistress had written personally, noting that Mara's story had inspired the institution's founding principles. That worth came from character and effort, not predetermined designation. Would you want me to go? Mara asked, uncertain. Edrin considered carefully. I want you to have every opportunity to become whoever you're meant to be. If that means attending school away from home for part of the year, then we'll make it work. You'll always have a home here, Mara. Always. But your life shouldn't be limited by my desire to keep you close. The answer was so perfectly him, protective but not possessive, loving but not controlling. Mara set the letter aside and moved to embrace him, feeling his arms come around her with the automatic affection that had replaced his initial careful distance. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. There's no rush to decide. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun track across the valley where Edrin had once scattered ashes and said goodbye to his first family. The pain of that loss remained, it always would, but it no longer consumed everything. He'd learned that love didn't require choosing between past and present, between honoring what was lost and embracing what had been found. Kieran joined them on the terrace, accepting tea with a satisfied sigh. The northern timber contracts are finalized. Production starts next month. Good. Edrin nodded. And the Omega Education Fund? Fully funded for the next 5 years. We've already received 23 applications from families who couldn't afford tutors before. The fund had been Mara's idea, using portion of Vale wealth to provide education for Omega children across the territories. Edrin had expanded the concept, creating scholarships and apprenticeship programs that would ensure designation didn't limit potential. You're changing the world, Kian observed quietly. Both of you. We're just making space for people to be themselves, Mara corrected. That shouldn't be revolutionary. But it is, Edrin said. And it starts with small acts of choosing differently. I chose to save you. You chose to trust me. Together, we chose to fight for something better than tradition demanded. As evening approached, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the three of them remained on the terrace, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by survival, by the stubborn refusal to accept that designation determined destiny. The wolves in distant forests howled their evening songs, and Vale Manor stood solid against the coming night, sheltering those who'd found home not through birth but through the revolutionary act of being chosen and choosing in return. Mara leaned against Edrin's shoulder, the photograph of her both parents tucked safely in her room but no longer the only family portrait she possessed. New images now lined the manor's walls, Mara and Edrin at her true claim ceremony, Mara with Shadow Mist, the three of them together in the library where so many quiet afternoons had been spent building trust brick by patient brick. Papa. Mara said softly. Yes. Do you ever regret it? Finding me that day? Edrin pulled her closer, his answer immediate and absolute. Every single day, I thank whatever fate put me on that ridge at that exact moment. You saved me, Mara. Just as much as I saved you. We saved each other, she corrected, smiling. Yes, Edrin agreed. We did. And in that moment, with spring blooming around them and family, chosen, fought for, permanent family, surrounding them, both of them understood the truth they'd learned through suffering and survival. That love, real love, wasn't about blood or designation or following rules someone else had written. It was about seeing someone who needed saving and choosing to reach out your hand. It was about being seen, truly seen, and choosing to stay. It was about building something new from broken pieces and calling it family because that's exactly what it was. The end.